Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our second last session for the final day of the Yes Speaker Series. I'm excited for today's talk because I'm joined by one of my favorite designers, Vanessa Eckstein, and one of my favorite people, former School of Design Chair, Dr. Elise Hudson. Today, Vanessa is going to share a talk on the impetus of our creative aliveness and how it is able to survive. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that the land on which George Brown College is situated is the traditional territory of the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation and other Indigenous people who have lived on this land. Today, the meeting place of Toronto is still the home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island, and we're grateful to have the opportunity to work in the community and on this territory. Across the School of Design, we remain committed to identifying and removing systemic barriers to accessing college programs and services, and are committed to identifying strategies, tools, and actions to better support our Indigenous student population. In a commitment to build connections and opportunities for students to engage with design's visionaries, YES features a week-long lecture series, 18 to be exact. The design-focused speaker series has been cultivated in an effort to provide dynamic perspectives and unique discussion opportunities for members of our community, including students and faculty alike. Honest advice for designers from really good designers connects the School of Design with those who have impacted the industry on a local and global scale. We encourage you to ask any questions you have for Vanessa in the YouTube chat. With that, I'm happy to introduce Vanessa Eckstein. Vanessa founded Blok in 1998 after a highly lauded career working at some of the top design studios in North America. Her experiences living and working in Buenos Aires, Los Angeles, New York, and Mexico City have given the studio a unique international perspective and scope that has been recognized and awarded around the world. Guided by the belief that design is at its best when it serves society, she's collaborated with some of the world's top talents, from leading contemporary artists and photographers to architects and authors, to bring this vision to fruition across a broad range of businesses and clients. Moderating the Q&A portion of today's session is Dr. Elise Hudson. Elise is a postdoctoral researcher in design economies in the Department of Design at Aalto University in Finland. Once upon a time, she was the chair for the School of Design at George Brown, and before that, director of exhibitions at an institution formerly known as the Design Exchange. Her research covers topics like a social value of design and distributed authorship in global design practice. She is happy to be working with design students in Finland, but also missing GBC colleagues and students. Welcome, Elise. With that, I would like to turn it over to Vanessa, who will start her presentation.
Hello, everybody. I'm sharing my screen, so 1 second. Okay, so we should be up and running. Everybody sees it, yeah?
Yeah, just hit play and then we'll get.
So welcome. My name is Vanessa Eckstein, and I'm very excited to talk about this subject because it is actually the one that moves my heart. I have a small design studio that I've had for 20 years, and the essence of us has always been about experimenting and exploring and trying to push the boundaries as much as we can. The impetus of everything we do has always been about meaning and purpose since the beginning of opening the studio. And I always forget to put my timer. As I say, I start the timer, but I will put it now. And today I'm going to talk about inspiration, but before even beginning, I wanted to share an experience I had 20 years ago when I went to see an exhibit of Louise Bourgeois at the Guggenheim. I think it was the first time a woman ever had a retrospective, which gives you an idea of where we're at in art in the world. And there was one question that they asked her that lingered with me for a very long time. They asked her what inspired her, which, as you know, is always a key question when you have artists or designers. And her answer was, it is not a question about what inspires me, but how it is able to survive. And I thought about this profoundly. It really shifted the way I understood inspiration. At the time, I was just a mother. I had two very young kids, I think a baby and a 2-year-old. And I felt exactly like this woman. Louise Bourgeois would die that I put her artwork on the side, but I wanted you to feel the extent of this work. And it was this woman house, which is trying to do it all, contain the house, express herself. Her hand is, sort of shining up, trying to sort of reach into something. And it moved me profoundly. I understood at that moment that that's what I was living. Through her artwork, I was living this sort of paradox and this duality between my creativity, my motherhood, my womanhood, myself. When we understand design as impetus of everything we do, it is everything we bring into our lives that affects us. How we connect personally to the artwork, or how it is able to survive, is more important than actually what inspires us. Not just what's out there, but what's in us. One of the great musicians, John Cage, and somebody I've read and has inspired me many times, talked about the only structure, and you can read it, which permits of natural activity is one that is flexible, as not to be a structure. I write in order to hear. Never do I hear and then write what I hear, and then write what I hear. Inspiration is not a special occasion. We normally are told that inspiration comes from this sort of like, and this is the narrative we have in a society. It's a jolt. It's like the thunderbolt. Oh my God, like, I woke up and I was totally inspired. I was in the shower. But the reality is that inspiration is not just a moment. It's not an instant, but actually a constant. It is not a state of mind, but a state of being. And you have to live it. Inspiration is actually bringing life into it. And this is part of one of his texts. John Cage has always experimented both with music, content, and thought. In my own ways, my way of keeping myself alive is literally opening myself to all these ways of thinking and expressing in the world. When one of the things that he wrote and talked about this idea, this talk about something, and naturally is also a talk about nothing. He brought this idea of art should come from within, then it is profound. But the difference between it should or it then or profound, we live art. Living it is the difference. Not considering, not pragmatizing it, not thinking about it, but actually inhabiting this world. We are incredibly lucky as creatives to inhabit a untangible, magical space. Everything is accessible to us. Everything. The way we see this image, each one of us is going to interpret it differently because of where we come from. And that is exactly what we bring into our work as designers. Art has always been life for me. This is the essence of how I live and how I see and interpret the world. And it is one word, it is one poem, it is one text, one thought that inspires me. It is accumulation of all of these. Susan Sontag used to say that her travel was actually just about accumulating, and everything inspired her. Everything, she was interested in everything. And this is where I come from when I think about what inspiration truly is. So the question is, are we open enough, curious enough, uncomfortable enough, unfamiliar enough, hungry enough to keep absorbing the world into us? And this is us that we shift. It is not the world. This is within us. This is the porousness in which we see. This is an image I've used a lot in talks because I love the connotations. This is the diagram of disassociation. But in reality, it really proves something that I've always believed, that we are all connected as human beings, and all the subjects are always connected. There is an interconnectedness in everything. So when we're thinking about a project, it is not about the research. That's just research. What you find as information is research. Thinking is thought, but it is much more profound when it is felt. What's interesting is when we start to connect all these different ideas and different ways of thinking and visuals and forms and feelings and senses and emotions, and something in us understands and deciphers them in a way that nobody else could. That is us. With no filters, with no pragmatism, that is us literally presenting ourselves to a different way of understanding the world and ideally creating towards it. For us in the studio, design has always been a flow. And when I'm stuck on an idea, I actually let myself wander between books, images, words, and see where that takes me. It ends up being a place which I could have never imagined. It is a dance between the certain and the uncertain, between the possibility and the impossibility, between randomness, ambiguity. I actually hold those words really close. Chaos. We design to put chaos in order, but we literally need to embody and almost I don't know, just let ourselves live in chaos, live with all these ideas, with all these images, in order to be able to extract that which is important to us, that which has meaning to us. The act of experimenting with the world, shifting our existing patterns. It is a poetic act. And poetry actually means to make. So I always never understood why poetry had so much for me and held so much for me. But I think it's that understanding that poetics is actually making. And what I love to do more than anything in this world is to create. Poetics, because it opens multiple ambiguous pathways of meaning, a way in which we affect meaning on our projects and hopefully a society at large. This is Buckminster Fuller experimenting with his dome. And I just want to sort of bring different images and ideas that actually connect. This is Olafur Eliasson's work, and see the connectivity, his understanding of light, his experimenting and his search. And Louise Bourgeois in her textile experimenting. There's not just formal connections, because that would be the easy way to understand this. There's profound connections of thought and of thinking and of value. And each one is questioning the world. Each one from their own perspective questions the world and answers it through art. We as designers, we always push art to be one thing and design another. That, design is about solving problems and art is about expressing and manifesting ourselves. But we actually are taking away an emotional and sensory value of design that can create a much more deeper impact to others, to communicate clear, but also our expression of ourselves into the design. No designer is the same, nor should we be the same. Art is a guarantee of sanity. I sometimes think it's a guarantee of insanity as well. But I like to play between those paradoxes and between those more ambiguous places. And this, for me, is actually what inspiration is about. Imagination is a place where it reigns. This is Dante, just to show you that great thinkers and great men of writing sometimes have the key to what we're looking for. If imagination is a place where it reigns, then that means that everything always is inspiration. And what differs is the openness by which we feel and we sense the world. I wanted to share this work by Cristo. I don't know if you know Jean-Claude and Cristo. They were a couple. She passed away, unfortunately. But during COVID, I've been very attached. I've always loved the work. But during COVID particularly, I've been very attached to the world, because actually I reframed COVID to the work they do. They said that they were in search of beauty. But for me, it's much more profound than that. What they normally do is, and what their work has been, their entire, I don't know how you say it in English, but work all these years, was to take on nature, buildings, and sometimes islands, and cover them completely. This was incredibly arduous, economically, physically, logistically, technically. And when you cover that which you see consistently, there is an awe by uncovering it that is inevitably revealed. There is a beauty that you re-encounter that you just took for granted because you just didn't find inspiration in that thing you saw every single day in the edge of your house, or the building that you saw that you didn't even pay attention to. To me, this is what this pandemic is going to do. It's going to reveal all the beauty that we took for granted. What a hug means, what to be with family, what it is to walk freely without fear, without masks. This, for me, was a beautiful reframing of what we're living. And I also think it's the essence of inspiration, because it isn't that things don't exist in the world, but it is our job to reveal it. This is Cristo and Jean-Claude covering and shaping an island by which, we've never paid attention to their form. And suddenly, with this pink materiality, it is the relationship to water, it's the relationship to land, it's the amount of green there is, and the shape that it forms. You see this differently because you understand it for the first time in a different context. And this is the thing. When our points of references are always the same, how do you see anew? when you're consistently, deciphering the world through the way you normally do, then it's difficult for you to change perspective. So changing that perspective is important for all of us. They covered Leonardo in Milan, and this for me brought something that Rodin used to say, the sculpture. And think about the age about some of the artists that I'm talking to you about. Rodin said that he never sculpted, he revealed. And that is actually where the inspiration truly comes from. It is a place, as Dante says, when it rains. If, there was a music that once said the way of inspiring was just to catch it from the air, because tunes were always in the air. Isn't it that like rain, like it's consistently falling? You need to have the openness to see. This is Mata Clark. His work was about seeing things from different perspectives. This is his work. He made these humongous building so we could see the Pompidou that was being built at the time in France, the museum, from a different point of view. But each one of us brings our own perspective to how we get inspired. In my case, coming from where I came from, coming from a dictatorship, I really believe that the way I see and sense the world comes from my cultural background, my own experience. Do we bring this as designers? Definitely, and yes, we bring all of it. The food we eat, the colors we sense, the relationships we have with our family. Everything is informed to how we see the work we do. This is Duma. This is an Argentinian artist. And you can see, I like this because it's taking serious subjects and turning them in a way that it reframes and rethinks our relationship to them. What if everything we feared becomes something we actually love, in the sense of making fun of it and holding it to become a toy and not something of destruction. Le Corbusier got inspiration from stones and from shells. It was called Les Objets Poétiques. He created the module of all of architectures, the modular, based on this structure, and ended up his life going from this very sort of stoic, beautiful, but very functional type of architecture to this very organic cabin, which was all designed as if it were a shell. And this is my son, because what inspired us is also what lives with us. His construction he has always lived building. Alberto Calach, the author who I've worked with, architect in Mexico City, we're designing a book for him right now. But look, the way we connect life and art and design. And then when I went to Mission Design, the Scandinavian countries, at an architectural studio I went, this was their models for architecture. And I thought, oh my goodness, this is typography. This is like, I couldn't see it but through the lens of my work. And then we decided to explore. We designed this typography for a project to replenish a lake in Mexico City with a very strong purpose. And then the rest was just play. Sol Lewitt, his exploration of lines has to do with structure and unstructure, with materializing and dematerializing. But then you have Daniel Buren. You would think it's almost the same, but it isn't. Each one comes from it, from a different perspective, and brings into the world their own understanding of a similar interpretation. Daniel Buren, Louise Bourgeoise. And then we came along with our book, For This Is Not a Toy. And we did our own version of an exhibit that for us expresses the subject as much as it honors everybody else that has worked within this. But just remember that in a Mexican market, the shades of a Mexican market have the exact same pattern, and the ball of a kid has this exact same pattern. So, when we talk about inspiration, plagiarism, the worst type of plagiarism is not to others but yourself, is actually not falling into repeating yourself at every project. This is for the exhibit. We did for the design exchange. I'll pass it on a little bit faster. And I'll let you read this, which is a project that we truly love. I'm looking at time because, I have 5 minutes and I have so much to say. This was for Wayward Arts. We got invited to create a magazine. And in this magazine, for me, this was an example of everything that inspired. I never was happier in a wall in my studio than coming to this and seeing this wall on all the different movements, avant-gardes, Duchamp, Lissitzky, Dadaism, Yves Klein, all these people that had always influenced me and moved me. I had a chance to bring them on the wall. So what this tells you is that we come as vessels, empty vessels, and it is up to you to fill it. Because inspiration isn't just a project you're working on. It isn't as linear as I just showed you or as ambiguous. It actually is a continuum. It is a state of becoming. It is always in motion. It's a conversation with you and the world, and that moves you in particular. You need to pay attention to the world, but you need to pay attention to what moves you, to what's important to your soul. And this was important to mine. And you see it all here. And it was just, I didn't have to do research for this. I just had to pull from everything I adored in my life and just put it on a wall and then make sense to it. From the cover to the inside. Kathleen, look at the image of Francis Picabia. This was all at the back of my mind while I was thinking about this project and making those connections that sometimes are disconnected. A happening of the 70s with a Mandela image by Magnum. And what does that mean? What does that dialogue mean that we create by juxtaposing completely diverse and different images into a conversation? The right is Edward James. This is an architect and an artist, actually, that created these stairways into nowhere in Mexico that very few people know about. These come along with more contemporary architecture. Again, this is all things that you carry in yourself, and then some project comes along and you have no idea when it is that lets everything flow. We did this 8 years ago, and we were having the discussion in our studio about Ferguson and Black Lives Matters and Tahrir Square. So the conversation wasn't just about a group, but actually about inequality and fairness. And we reached out to every single photographer to ask for the rights to be able to express this, and the power that it meant for us to honor what was going on. But to be inspired is also to push yourself into the unfamiliar. I took the studio to Berlin 2 years ago. It sounded like such an insane idea. Why would you pay for everybody to move into the studio, get 2 apartments, get a studio space? And when the pandemic hit, I realized, oh my God, this was the best thing I've ever done in my life. We had already moved into digital, but more than that, we had a humanity and a connectivity that we would have never had without this experience. What this experience brought us was to jump into the unfamiliar, to go into space, into a country, into a language we did not know, and see anew. You do not travel to change landscapes, you travel to change your eyes, to really shift that perspective. I've discovered, and not long ago, what place was mine? What was the place where I truly got inspired? And for me, it's not a physical place, it's a more philosophical place. It's at the edge. At the edge, if imagine the top of a mountain and you're holding ground on the edge and you're ready to leap, and you might die and throw yourself down and just fall and crash, or you might, be as me, that I'm idealistic enough that I think I might leap and fly. And at that point where you're grounded, but you see all the possibilities into what could happen, it's the idea of that horizon that consistently moves and you move with it. That is a point that exhilarates me. And I find it in the beginning of projects. I find it when I discover something randomly that I never imagined. I find it when I have these walls in my studio for a project that falls on my lap and I think, oh my God, this could never be better. And all of these people and artists, some I know, some I don't, show up, and I'm consistently expanded. This was for a book, Origen Mexico. It couldn't have been a more beautiful. I lived 10 years in Mexico. Juan O'Gorman, we actually introduced this book, this architect into the book. He wasn't considered at the time, but just to show the influence one has into shaping the projects that we work on. And this was a book that literally honors all the artists, thinkers that lived in Mexico and brought things from Mexico to the world. I'm just showing you a little bit of our process as my time is running out. But every single accumulation of knowledge, of culture, of life, of my experience in the markets of Mexico City came into this book. Some stamps that were on the right came from my own collection, my own, curiosity into ephemera, into little details. Everything around you is shaped by something of the sort that will show up in ways that seem unimaginable. Our expression of it ended up being a exploration of typography, of paper, of materiality. This is copy paper, and the colors that inspired by Barragan, by Goethe, by all these influences that what I lived with. And two more projects that I'll go through fast. This is 48 North. When cannabis came into Canada, before we legalized, they called me for a project, I think 3-4 years ago, and we couldn't even talk about cannabis at the time. So inspiration were cactuses, were colors, were shapes, were forms, were emotions. And Leah, who works at Blok, she started to explore and play with the emotion of a sense of a feeling versus of a leaf. And I think that it ended, the constraints that you sometimes find become the opportunities that you find. You carve the space. You do not just follow the path. You actually carve it. And this was the identity that we came up with. Insinuation of cannabis, because cannabis couldn't be shown. Colors that would, at the time, completely different than what that space had worked with. We got into product design and started to design product within that space. And as you see, even the shape of one of the grinders that we designed came out of that idea of that cactus. And it influenced everything unexpectedly in ways that, had we just looked at cannabis and what that was, would have never been affected by it. And I'll go a little bit faster. The magazine, this is our studio and the way we work. The magazine that we shifted from paper to digital, that we printed from a parking lot because COVID had hit. And the way we move is always agile, is always in motion. Because honestly, if we don't keep on learning, this is actually too boring to stay still. And then the last little project that I want to share is something we launched now a couple of months ago. This is Force Studio. It is a line of tableware that actually honors everything we're seeing in the pandemic. It honors that enough is plenty. It honors the importance of sharing a meal, of family, of long conversations, of content, and the beauty of form. And we started this 4 years ago, not now. This is touching now based. And the reason I show this is that I took my kids to Mongolia. We traveled from China in the Trans-Siberian train, crossed Mongolia, crossed the Gobi Desert, through Russia. And when I went to Mongolia, I was working on the tableware, and I asked myself one question. How can you be happy with so little? Being a nomad, carrying so little around. And I know that happiness comes from within. I have that answer. I just was looking for a little bit of a deeper insight. And when I went to Mongolia, I discovered that it had nothing to do with having or not having. It wasn't about holding a huge house or holding little. It actually was about the openness by which you move. When you go to a ger, you're invited to share their meal in a circle. There is very little, and yet everything that is there is actually absolutely rich. And this is what inspired this tableware. And it's the form, it's the intent, it's the fact that we just did it because we wanted to do it. There was nothing that we needed to do. This was a manifestation of a value, not just of an object. And the sensuality of the products, the connectivity, all of it is an honoring of just what we discovered in Mongolia, the openness by which we share. And given the fact that I already know I'm far past my time, I'm going to just end by sharing a little bit of our beliefs. Idealism is a precondition. Uncertainty is intrinsic to process. Slant to shift your perspective. This is actually where your inspiration will be best suited. Easy is soulless. Chaos is a way of thinking. All these ways of thinking don't follow your narrative of what design is, clear solution. But actually, I find that this is where my inspiration and my creativity comes from. It is ambiguous, it is porous, it is open, it is rich, it is alive. And I never have a problem of getting inspired. I have the problem that I'm highly inspired all the time, but because I am in awe. But what I'm in awe is actually of life. This is my team. There is nothing you've seen in this presentation that does not honor the people that worked on it. And it is all of us. It is also the spirit of the humanity of the studio, of being, we're personal. We are a studio of people, not of bosses and employees. This is us as a team. And this is what we did in the lockdown. We took a week off. We called it double lockdown because we hadn't stopped working through it all. But just to give you an idea of all the things we've been doing in our own little lockdown. I'm going to leave you with one thing. This world does not need another designer. This world needs you and needs your insight and your heart and your felt emotions and your understanding of the world. Do not forget that you're not seeing all the designers in the world and looking at them and thinking, this is who I want to become. None of them would have become what they become without honoring who they are. So literally, this talk is not about what inspires us, but actually what inspires you. And this is poet Octavio Paz. And I always think that when we dream, we need to deserve our dreams. As he said, deserve yours. Thank you so very, very much.
Thank you so much, Vanessa. I could have listened to you for another half an hour. I'm sorry that you had that time limit. It was lovely.
I was speeding it, if I could, just in case I was too long.
No, it was fantastic. I think my first question for you is about this sort of idealism that underpins your work. And there's this sort of lovely, almost naivete about and positivity in your work. And I just wondered, have you always been like this? And you founded Blok 20 years ago. What has given you inspiration? Has it changed over the last 20 years?
So I think that yes, I think that the positive element, the idealistic element, has always been in me. I sometimes see that sometimes design wants to go into let's just talk about, the areas that are really difficult. They're all difficult all the time. I mean, the fact that you have idealism does not take away the journey you have to do. But honestly, I've always been inspired by the great thinkers and leaders. And for me, Mandela is a great example. He stood 4 hours when he was on trial, spent 4 hours talking about equality and value. He could have just said, you know what, I'm done, I'm on trial. 4 hours. He didn't even know if he was going to be killed, imprisoned. So I just think that the idealism is a prerequisite, is that you need to believe that if you think something has to change, you do it. And I think that is as simple as it gets. Is my idealism, we underpin idealism to not be realist, but we need bigger visionaries. We need poets in this world. We need artists, we need designers to see the world in a way that many cannot. We can feel it. And I think that my idealism comes from just the possibility, understanding that when you create, it's always a possibility,
Yeah. Thank you. I see some other people agree with me in the chat here that there was no such thing as too long with your presentation.
Oh.
So I think the student crowd is appreciating this too.
Thank you.
And if anybody has questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them in a couple of minutes. So Vanessa, that connects to my next question, which was about this past year. And you're so positive and you're so optimistic, and you have this lovely line about it's the designer's job to reveal the beauty that has been there all along, and the pandemic has shown us what we've been missing. But at the same time, it's been a tough year, and I wonder, from your perspective as a designer, were there moments when it was hard to find inspiration, and did this year change your work in some way?
Well, this pandemic hit me hard, and so so let's talk about how it hit me. So at least we put a little bit like. But all is realistic, and that's what I also want to say. All of it has been me, and the studio. When the pandemic hit, we are a very idealistic studio. We do not have retainers. I've kept the studio small in order to have freedom. So the idealism is not a word I use. Is a life I live, and I truly philosophically stand by it. So all these choices of being a small studio, not having retainers, choosing the projects that are meaningful and creative and purposeful, all of these great assets, in 20 years, I never, ever saw them disappear as fast as when the pandemic hit. And all the new projects that were coming, we're in constant movement. We finish projects and we get new ones. And don't ask me how that works, because I still think it's a miracle of the cosmos that we keep on getting work. But for the first time in my life, we didn't. It all fell. All of it, every single, we had 7, 8 jobs, and they fell like a domino. The only thing that stayed was the existing projects. And I did a very incredibly fast move. In tears, just so you guys know, we cry, we designers cry, we get frustrated. I didn't want my staff to go on CERB, and they didn't. I did not lower anybody's salary, I lowered mine. This is also philosophically important to me. I didn't want anybody to have to lose their salary, but we worked harder. Our jobs fell, and what we did is I stood on one thing. When the world stops, we as Blok keep on moving, and when the world literally tries to catch up, we're 5 steps ahead. And that's how I saw it. And I thought, this is a chance, this is an opportunity. I don't understand it, I don't see it, but I just focused on what we could as a studio become and be better. So we had both sides, really, really tough. I gave up my space. I had to move in the first week of COVID, when we didn't even know, when they were saying don't touch anybody, I was just touching all the movers, and I was like, this is great, this is fantastic. When we didn't understand anything, that's the week I moved. And that's the week my team said, Vane, I didn't want my staff to come, and 2 of my designers said, we're not leaving you alone. So that reveals also loyalty and love and humanity, and that we're in this together. We packed it, we have everything in storage. Has our studio changed? Oh, yes, it does. But not in ways that you think. We didn't shift into a different place. It actually confirmed that the path that we were on was so great, that this literally, it made it closer. It shortened where we were seeing ourselves going and where the world was coming. It felt like, wow, this is just speeding our way. And we have some really funky projects, you guys, from restoring a 1917 Airstream that I bought 4 years ago, not now, to purposeful projects, to some wacky project about shifting the way we think about creativity. So we have a lot going, and that's just on the side of everything else.
And it was
silverware launch of another company.
Right, that was the Fours studio and the ceramics, right? So how did you pull that off in the middle of a pandemic?
No words. I have no words. I think that we were all grateful. It was crazy. We worked, I think I've never worked more in my entire life. Running 2 companies is insane. Please, guys, do not ever think this is an example of anything. It is absolutely crazy. But again, the beauty of it all is that by doing this table where I leaped and we leaped as a studio when we started the design process, not now. So these things just confirm that sometimes, you know what, you do not need a business plan. You cannot foresee what's happening. Sometimes you need to follow your gut and follow that wherever this leads, it will be a place that you need to go. No matter what, this is the path you're in and you should follow it. And it's funny because money came my way in ways that I would have never envisioned because I started this. We started to get products as clients hiring us for product design, but it also the learnings that it brought. So how did we do it? Working really hard with an incredible team, with a belief that we had to, and honestly leaping into the unknown, really. And the more linear we become as a society, the more data-oriented, the more analytical, we are forgetting that humanity is about emotions. Humanity is actually everything you're feeling right now in COVID, everything you miss, that is it. So I'm honoring that in design.
I think I want to work with you, Vanessa. It sounds like a lovely team to be part of. So thinking maybe on a bigger scale than about the design profession, I read an interview you did recently where you talked about that this is design's moment to cross boldly into other professions. And I think you had this line, you said something similar before about it's not just about accepting a job, it's about carving your future, and that you could see this as a moment for design to really carve a new future. And so on a broader level of the profession and the field of design, what do you think?
I think we need, this is an amazing opportunity. I think we're hungry. And I think, what I started this conference, this talk about, I mean it. The only thing that is going to shift the way you see the world is the hunger by which you encounter the world, how you encounter that world. And I think we're hungry. We're hungry creatively. We have been learning in silos. We have been learning about graphic design, and I have opposed that way all my life. We need to open ourselves to understand that everything that comes into it, philosophy, economy, humanity, all influences our design. And we as communicators, as visionaries, in many ways, have a possibility to think about the world differently. And we need to have more conversations in other areas, more profound, more enriched conversations with other areas, with science, with humanities, with poetry, with literature, with environmental issues, and be advocates and make shift by doing, truly doing, not just being part of the talk, not just greenwashing. We're all sustainable, it seems, but at the end of the day, we have millions of plastics all around and we're not doing nothing about it. Okay, what are we doing? So let's just do. And in doing, we become. That's the key to it. We sometimes think we need all this structure to do. But you know what? We do every day. Simple things.
Simple things. Okay. We have a question. Anna Rita, do you want to pull out this question from Mary? So Mary says, thank you for the inspiring talk. My heart is filled with love. It was brave of you to travel to Berlin with your whole team. How did your perspective on design shift after that experience?
Thank you, Mary, so much. You know what? I had that project in this idea of taking the studio for Berlin for 4 years. So what shifted wasn't just design. Honestly, I had so many things about design that I could tell you about, from finding the first day, the first day I arrived, I went to a bookstore, opened a book on architecture, completely conceptual, saw a typeface that I loved, looked at it and thought, oh my God, I don't recognize this typeface. That was so tiny that I actually don't even believe that I even saw the difference, because, really, I can't see that well to see that small. But I saw that A and I fell in love with that A. And I found the typographer who ended up giving the type. We bought one and he literally gave us it was designed as we were designing for that book that you see, Origen. So when we talk about design and we're thinking, if I'm going to say, did we expand ourselves in design? You know what? It expanded, our world expanded. The fact that we went into a different culture, serendipitously found this typography, then connected to this typographer that collaboratively and beautifully shared his type for us to come out with a book on originality with an original typeface. that shifted the way we connected, the way we shared design, the way we shared inspiration and community. That shifted. It also, when we say, how did our perspective on design, I don't think it was my perspective that changed. What changed was the unfamiliarity, the seeing things, being open to think, to wander, to stop, to take myself off the routine, that little lovely thing we love to do, that is follow the same path every day, pick up the coffee in the same place, shift that little routine of my life and put us all into an uncomfortable place. Uncertainty was something that I've always felt comfortable, given my background. But my studio, what they came back to me saying is, Vanya, we learned about uncertainty. Imagine what this did to help them into the pandemic. It's all uncertain. But our lesson was learned in Berlin, and this crazy idea that I didn't know I could afford of taking my studio there. So what shifted is the belief that when you have that gut, and if for 4 years, what you have in yourself and that idea lingers and lingers and lingers, just do it. Go for it. Because you do not know what the repercussions of that are, not at the moment, but in the longer term of your life.
Vanessa, how do you see yourself as the creative director in terms of inspiring others? Like, I think you're very conscious about where inspiration plays a role in your life, and then you've taken your team to Berlin. But is this part of the regular job of creative director to inspire others? And you talked about a similar thing with your kids, taking them to Mongolia and pushing people into these new experiences.
I think it is. I think there's something about this idea of the horizon that I actually like. I like this idea of the idea of the horizon that is inaccessible, and yet you're always going forward and it moves with you. And I feel that in my life. I'm always hungry for more because it's as consistent, like I can never achieve it, yet I'm always hungry for it. And I think inspiration is, again, it's a state of being, it's a state of aliveness. I know that, when you talked about what kept you, we didn't go into what kept you inspired in the pandemic, is what I realized is that what kept me motivated was definitely not the world around me. That's when I became most conscious this year that it is coming from within. And that's where that aliveness, when Louise Bourgeois asks, how does it survive? That actually is the question. Not what particularly brings oh my God, I love that graphic is amazing, I adore, I should have done that. It is what is hungry about you and that inspiration. So for me, that is really important. It is a mixture of inspiration, but the other word that is as important for me is hope. And I mix both together because in inspiration, hope is at the core of it. And I think that now more than ever, and all the students going into this world, into the job force that has shifted, that seems different, that seems, grab this moment because it carries a unique energy. Crises carry energy. The beauty of dictatorship is not the dictatorship, is actually what it reveals. It reveals one thing, is freedom. Art and design is an act of liberation, and it is an act of freedom. And that's what inspiration and hope do to me. They free my soul. And it's as simple as that.
Lovely, thank you. Eva is saying true in the comments here. Are there any other questions from the audience? Anything that the students would like to ask Vanessa about her work and her career or studio? If not, I'll keep asking questions.
Be brave, guys. It's just me, and I'd love to hear from you. And there is no answer. There is no question that I wouldn't answer, actually.
Okay, while they're being brave about asking a question, I've noticed on your website and on the FOR's website that you really like to showcase other people's work and this idea of listening and learning from other professions and fields. Is this part of the way that you keep the inspiration going, by supporting these other fields and maintaining this dialogue in a very seemingly intentional kind of way?
Yes, I think there's always intentionality. There's always attention. And I think it's important to share it and to, not everybody. I think that how we are brought up affects who we become, and that is inevitable. And I was brought up with a lot of elasticity of mind. And I honor it now more than ever, that it's, and I tell my kids this all the time, it's you need to change your mind to prove that you have one. And in a society that we are based on ideology of like, oh no, I think this, and this is what I think, we forget, that actually debate is more interesting than your thoughts. It's not interesting about what I think or what you think. What is interesting, comes out of this conversation, Elise, what you propel from me at this moment that is different than what I said at other times, because we tell our own narratives and old stories over and over. So what's interesting is when we have a dialogue and we actually think, wow, what you just said is actually super interesting, is a different perspective than I've ever understood. And that expands me. And so I think that, I don't remember where we started in this conversation, but it is for me about elasticity, both of mind, of inspiration. So the elasticity of mind is it's another way of also, because a lot of what I try to bring to the studio is not just, the inspiration isn't just formal. It is many times in me thought, many times experienced and lived. That's why I take my kids to, like the studio, the kids, or I travel to just find myself in places that I don't know, that I can get lost, that I wander. Mm-hmm. Wandering is an important thing. Daydreaming. Come on, let's bring all of that back. Let's just demystify this idea that we need to have a track and follow it. We need to literally open ourselves to experience life and discover, and let it discover us. Let it encounter us. And that is the key. We do not know what we do not know.
This is so motivating. Okay, we have another comment here of, Serge says, I love your point of always having inspiration. It made me rethink how I view it. I really tried to think of a question, but Vanessa is so thorough, I'm taking it in. Yeah, Vanessa, you've shown us so many images and so many, the dialogue. I've been absorbing a lot. Thank you. There's a lot to take in here. Has there ever been any moments where inspiration has terrified you, where you've been inspired by something and it's just made you nervous or unsure what to do with it?
Always nervous. I'm nervous about giving this talk. You'd imagine that but no, we talked a little bit about the imposter syndrome. I'm going to kill that imposter syndrome. It doesn't exist. The imposter syndrome concept, I was thinking about, because Elise brought it on. I think Anna brought it up. It doesn't exist, because this is pure fear, and fear is normal. Oh my God, am I going to say something? Actually, I'm not worried about if I'm going to give a great talk. Actually, I'm more worried about, am I going to honor how I think? Am I going to present it in a way that feels as true as I feel it? Am I going to, all these ideas? I'm so inspired for so many things. Will I inspire you guys to go into the world differently? I'm worried about that, not about what you think about me. Is, am I going to honor you in doing justice to what I know I can give? So that brings me fear. And there's many times that I have a project that brings me fear. And as I tell my daughter every time, fear is a dragon that shows up, but only when you cross through it and it becomes fog, you realize, wow, that was just fog. And that is my way of fearing everything. I fear a lot of things, but I just go right through it. I just decided that when I go through it and when I surrender to it, I actually grow. And that dragon sort of, one way or the other, sort of becomes fog. And the more I do it, the more relentless I become with, and the more I believe that I can. And I think that's where self-esteem kicks in, is in order to build the self-esteem, because there is no awards, no anything that anybody can say about your work that will build the self-esteem, except you putting the effort and believing that you can, and knowing that magically sometimes I think, oh my, how am I going to pull this off? And that magically it happens is because you've done it enough times, you've done it so many times that that one way or the other it's going to work out. And I think that's how I go about it. It's day by day, task by task. Never look at everything on my plate, because I literally would run away. And I just do things day by day. But my I'm gonna say this, that is important. Take your tasks and cut them in half, but take your life and dream big. Really, guys, dream big. Because these are your dreams. You dream small, you'll get small. You dream big, it may take you many, many thousand years, but one day you'll get there. At least I'm trying to get there. I'm trying really hard.
Wow, Vanessa, thank you. I think that we can end there. That was, don't want to keep using the word inspiring, but it was inspirational. Thank you. It was lovely to have you. Thank you for your time. Thank you also for your generosity with the School of Design. I know you've been involved in so many ways over the years, and we very much appreciate it. Oh, wait, we have one last question if we have time. Christine Doe has asked a question. Which is, why did you pick Berlin? This is a good question.
Okay, that's a very good question. So just so you know, this idea of relocating, I want to do it all the time. So it's not just one thing. I'm just going to throw it out there. My studio now, obviously, when you pamper, how are we going to pull it off again? Just so also, I don't have the solutions of how I do this. I do not. I leap. You do have to understand that my psyche, for some bizarre reason, is actually comfortable with leaping. Why Berlin? Many things. I was looking for a city. I like tension, and when I say tension, it's not tension, conflict. I actually run away from conflict. I'm not very good at conflict personally, but I like things that have tension, that have paradoxes, that are not cookie cutting, simple, but are complex, because I find there's depth and richness to it, both from a design point of view and from an artistic point of view. Berlin has enough grunge, enough texture, enough alternative. It has alternative movements that I found interesting. From a historical point of view, it is heavy. It has weight. It has both and this is maybe the most interesting part, is when we rented this sort of sharing space, I went walking from my apartment. I would cross this line, which I didn't know was actually the wall, but it was marked on the floor. So when I was aware of that, I thought, oh my goodness, I am crossing freedom and non-freedom every single day. So all those many things versus just, I'm going to a city that is nice and has good food. And I really wanted a city that could give me experiences like the one I just talked to you about, that for me was profound. You are making that choice. I also, and this the last one, I had the pleasure of judging with a German designer at Cannes one year, and we were able to get together, and this was so beautiful. And she had been raised in East Berlin, and it was super interesting to be in Berlin and listen to her talk and tell her part of her story, of what stories that you don't know. And one was about the sense of community that East Berlin had, because they were struggling against everything else, like because they didn't have freedom. And think about that in relationship to what we're looking at right now, at the lockdown. Our sense of community is changing. As in East Berlin, their sense of community was incredibly strong because they only could depend on them. So all of that makes those learnings so much more than design, because they become learnings of life. And design is life, art is life. That's do not ever forget that is what we do. We live it, we absorb it, and it is the porousness and the openness, like what I learned in Mongolia, by which you move and you share. So that's the other thing, that I think, and just to end it, Elise, I think I do feel a responsibility, my personal responsibility, to be able to share these learnings. I never had them, and I want to be able to share them. And hopefully all of you can as well, as you grow into your careers and yourselves.
Thank you. Thank you, Vanessa. Anna Rita, do we have time for one more question? I realize now that Ava has put one up. Okay, well, this is the last question now that we have questions. So Ava's asking, as designers, our world mainly consists of creativity and inspiration, but the whole world isn't like that. So when you're doing a job, how do we draw a line between experimentation and realism?
So, hi, Ava, that's an amazing question. So just so you know, my world is actually filled with everything. I do a lot of work for social justice. Now, the thing is that we confuse, because we're talking now about creativity and inspiration, that talking about human rights, poverty, is disengaged from inspiration, actually it's when you need most inspiration, because the areas where you need most inspiration are the ones that don't have it, not the ones that have it. Inspiration isn't just about an artwork in a museum. Many times inspiration is the one that changes a framework or changes a perspective of somebody that has no hope more than their survival skills. Every single day, the only thing that they need to think about is what food they put on the table. Well, we can help in many ways, sometimes directly, sometimes by bringing value to somebody that brings value. I have suffered a lot because I'm so socially conscious, and we worked in projects about menstruation in Rwanda. In projects, we're here working with MAMAC, Making Art, Making Change, right here in Toronto, worked in Nicaragua. We work with the Center for Political Studies in LA. We bring value to those that bring value. That is as important sometimes than doing it directly. But I'm also in Moms of the World, which was this completely grassroots little group of moms coming from around the world, many refugees, doing something. So when you talk about creativity and inspiration, it isn't just in design, and that's exactly what it is you need to live it in you. When you encounter poverty, challenges, humanity, inhumanity, racism, inequality, you need to break those through. And actually, I stand for that profoundly. That is what we leave our kids. That is the value legacy. What you don't like in this world, you go and you do it. And now we talked about our creativity coming from that, but my creativity inspires and gets inspired at the core when it has meaning, purpose, and social change. Because without social change, there is nothing. But that also needs visionaries, and that also needs to move the dial forward.
Thank you, Vanessa. Visage has written so many good pearls of wisdom here. Thank you very much. I think this has been lovely in terms of giving us all some perspective at the end of the school year in the middle of such a strange time.
I know.
It's been very helpful. Thank you.
No.
Okay, so we'll wrap it up here. And just to say that at 3 o'clock, Matt Wiley will be speaking if you want to tune back in then. And 7 p.m. is the award show for the School of Design. So thank you, Inarita. Thank you, year-end show committee and students, for all this work you've put into this week. It's been really quite impressive. And Vanessa, thanks again. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you, and congratulations to all. I know the world is waiting for you. I hope you know that. Thank you. Bye.